Monthly program. My name is Wendy Kurtz, and I am your program chair, along with my wonderful co-chair, Amber Schulman. Amber, is your line open?
It is. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to have a great program for you.
Great. Before we get started, I don't think everyone has had the chance to meet her yet, so I'd like to introduce you to Danielle Robinson. Danielle is our new event program coordinator for professional interest sections. She's our staff liaison and will be behind the scenes today running the board, so to speak, making sure everything works on our teleseminar, webinar platforms. You'll remember this is the role Caroline Berman had before she was promoted to events manager with PRSA. So congratulations again to Caroline on her promotion to events manager. We also want to give a big thank you to Miriam Santiago, who's done a fantastic job filling in and keeping us on track the past few months. No easy task with this group, but before Danielle joined us. So we really appreciate everything Caroline and Miriam have done to keep our section going, and we're thrilled to have Danielle on board. Looking forward to working with her. And with that, I'll turn it over to Danielle to go over a few housekeeping items regarding our program, and then we'll get started. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, Wendy. Please note that all participant lines are muted for the duration of our presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A feature in the webinar control panel at the top or bottom of the screen. You may need to hover your mouse at the top or bottom of your screen to reveal the webinar controls. We will allow about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Please note this program is being recorded and it will be available for future playback. With that, I'll turn it over to Wendy.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. And for those of you who've joined us on the Zoom platform, just a quick reminder that we're doing our interview format program today, so we won't be using slides. So if you don't see anything change on your screen, don't panic. That's by intention. So again, as Danielle mentioned, submit your questions via chat like we usually do, and we'll get to them at the end. So on with the show. Today we are going to learn about value-based fees, and our special guest is Mr. Alan Weiss, PhD. Alan is one of those rare people who can say he is a consultant, speaker, and author, and actually mean it. His consulting firm, Summit Consulting Group, Inc., has attracted such notable clients as Merck, Hewlett-Packard, GE, Mercedes-Benz, the Federal Reserve, the New York Times, Toyota. I could spend the next hour going over the who's who of clients that are clamoring to get to Alan. He's had over 500 other leading organizations that his firm has attracted. He is the author of over 500 articles and 60 books, including his bestseller, $1 Million Consulting, which I know some of you emailed me and said, hey, I have his book. I'm so excited he's coming. So that's great. You get to hear him live in person today. And then, of course, the book on which today's topic is based, Value-Based Fees, How to Charge and Get What You're Worth, a Guide for Serious Consultants. His newest book will be out in March next year, so look for that, Fearless Leadership, Overcoming Reticence, Procrastination, and the Voices of Doubt Inside Your Head. His books have been on the curricula at Villanova, Temple, and the Wharton School of Business. They've been translated into 12 languages, and the New York Post has called him one of the most highly regarded independent consultants in America. He's the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award of the American Press Institute, and it's a particular note that this is the first ever for a non-journalist and one of only 7 awarded in the 65-year history of the association. So we are thrilled to have his expertise with us today. Alan's been called the undisputed global thought leader on the subject of value-based fees, having personally sold over $100 million in value-based fees, and he's mentored over 650 consultants, helping them increase their revenue by over $600 million. I was first introduced to Alan in his work with value-based fees through Robert Middleton, who many of you know has presented for our group a few times, and since determining fees has always been one of the top topics requested in our annual survey, we knew Alan would just be a perfect resource to share his extensive experience with us. In fact, several of our members submitted questions in advance, and so we'll go through them as we talk, and again, there'll be Q&A at the end. I wanted to mention one other thing I love when I was looking for some additional information about Alan, because I've read all of his books and I know about his work, but I was looking for something new and a little different. One of the reviews in the praise for Alan about his material was that Alan Weiss can help anyone who is prepared to listen. Well, Alan, today we have an audience full of independent professionals who are prepared to listen, so welcome aboard.
Thanks, Wendy. Why don't you just keep going? I enjoy listening to you.
And I could probably talk much longer. Just, give me any book and I can rave about it, as I know many on our call can as well. So what we'll do is let me just say this. While we can't tell our audience members what to charge, number one, that's not our role. And number two, more importantly, with the veritable plethora of factors to consider when setting fees, and everyone's situation is unique, we just don't do that. So what we do is strive to provide information on how to determine fees to help our members, who are primarily independent, solo practitioners, senior level, figure out what's best for their individual situation. So let's do that today, and let's just start right at the top. Alan, what exactly is value-based pricing?
Value-based fees are based on the outcomes you deliver to your client. And so, in other words, in any transaction, any client engagement, when you walk away, the client should be better off. If the client's not better off, then all bets are off. But given the fact the client's better off because certain business and or personal objectives were met, value-based fees reflect that. And when people ask me, when a client would ask me, not used to this, what's the basis for your fees if it's not by the hour or the day, I say the following: I help you produce dramatic results with a substantial return on investment in return for equitable fees for me. And that's how partnerships work. So it's that simple.
That's interesting. How do you, so dramatic results, how do you quantify for them or clarify when the client says, that's great, I want to hire you, it sounds wonderful, my business will grow, my life will be better? How do you go about determining that value that you bring? One of the challenges our group has, of course, is, we've been raised, if you will, on charging an hourly rate. And as, of course, you often say, that gives you a finite resource because time is limited. So how do you determine?
Hourly fees are also unethical because the client deserves the fastest possible solution to his or her issue, yet the consultant is paid a lot of money only by staying there a long time. So it's more than how much the consultants can make. It's really a question of ethics. So here's how you determine value-based fees. There are three components in the formula, so to speak, and I don't want to use that too dramatically. But one is, what are the tangible outcomes that are expected and that can be annualized? So in a very simple way, to just for the sake of my example, if you're cutting attrition saves you money. If you cut attrition. If you're improving profit or improving revenues, whatever you're doing, all that saves you money, you can calculate that. If you increase sales by 2%, you can calculate that. In the PR business, if you're increasing someone's leads or sales or conversions or whatever, you can calculate this. The second area is non-tangible outcomes or intangible outcomes times the emotional impact. And so in a lot of cases, because you do great work, your client doesn't have to work 60 hours a week anymore, but can work 40 hours a week, spend more time with the family. Or your client's repute will be so enhanced that the client will be next in line for promotion or be able to go elsewhere to a better job. That's what I call emotional impact. And then thirdly, there are peripheral benefits. And so, for example, if you improve profit in an organization, more people will want to work there because the bonus pots will be filled, and you will cut your recruiting expenses that you're paying the headhunters and so on. I call those peripheral benefits. So tangible benefits times annualization, intangible benefits times emotional impact, plus peripheral benefits equal the sum total of what the client's going to get. And when you assign a fee to this, you want to show at least a 10-to-1 return. In most cases, consulting firms will tell you a 2.5 or 3.5-to-1 return makes clients happy. I'm talking about a 10-to-1 return.
That's a good return that nobody could argue with. If you can increase their return 10, then your fee becomes almost a non-issue.
That's exactly right.
Of course, getting them to understand the value you bring to the table that can help them get to that 10-time result can be a challenge sometimes. And part of this is the need to educate our clients as well as our prospects much better than, maybe some of us traditionally have, because, the clients are also saying, well, I can only afford 10 hours, and having that conversation about, you're not buying my time, you're buying my expertise. So how do you suggest, or what do you recommend when somebody's trying to, really, again, going back to this model that has been used forever, charging by the hour, how would someone even begin to start establishing value-based fees?
I
with their next prospect, or what?
I pioneered this with consultants back in the 90s, and so anybody can use this. I was told it wouldn't work in Germany, and it works in Germany. It wouldn't work in Japan, it works in Japan. And it even works with attorneys, who are probably the worst business people of all time.
Yeah.
And so what you do is you have to educate the client, and you say, look, if I know this problem you have is complex, but if I solved it in the next 5 minutes, wouldn't that be worth a great deal? And they say, well, of course it would. I said, so why do I want to stay 3 months to try to solve it? The faster I solve it, the more it's worth. It's as simple as that. And when you show the 10-to-1 return I just spoke about, the fee does become a non-entity. I think what all of you have to understand is this. $100,000 is not what it used to be. Organizations are spending $100,000 to mist their plants, to pave the parking lot. When I'm a car guy, and 20 years ago there were probably 7 cars in the U.S. that sold for $100,000. Today there are 34. So we can't look at these amounts of money as if we don't deserve them. And the biggest impediment to value-based fees, by the way, is low self-esteem.
So that's an interesting point that you bring up. Let's explore that a little bit. You talk about self-esteem, and I would think most of us tend to think, well, I've built a relative decent book of business, and I can get up and speak in front of a crowd and have a decent reputation. So we don't really think about having low self-esteem issues. And yet I know through some of your work and some of Robert's work that that's a much bigger issue often than people realize. What do you think is the reason for that low self-esteem issue when we've got the credentials and we've got the experience and we've got the proven clients behind us, but that issue's still there, and maybe some people haven't even really thought about that lately?
Credentials are meaningless. Nobody cares about the initials after your name. Certainly clients don't. I have a certified speaking professional. I'm in the Hall of Fame, which you talked about before. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Management Consultants. There are only 2 people in history who've ever had both. Doesn't mean a thing. Nobody cares. And so, if you take a look, they just had the Emmys on TV, and if you take a look at somebody holding an Emmy or an Oscar or a Grammy after they win it, they're terribly insecure because actors especially have been rewarded for playing someone who they are not. And they wonder if they'll ever work again. And the imposter syndrome is very, very strong. So despite the fact that you have a track record, people try too hard not to lose business rather than to win business. Now, I thought it was all about fees at one time. Then I realized self-esteem was underlying that. And then I realized it was all about fear, which is why I wrote Fearless Leadership. It comes out in December, by the way, not March. That was an error, I think.
I'm sorry.
No,
okay.
Not your fault. I think it was our fault. So that's why I wrote about fear. And the fact is that people don't, what you talk about is people, feeling good about themselves. They still don't feel like a peer of the buyer. They feel like a vendor. They don't feel like they can walk into an office on somebody else's turf when somebody else has the money and somebody else has the staff, especially solo practitioners, and be a peer of the buyer. But the fact is they can and they should. And it's only through peer-level relationships, not being a vendor, not being subservient, not being obsequious, that you can gain the stature you need to say to people, this is what it costs. I used to mentor people and tell them the exercise was to look in the mirror and say the fee is $50,000. And they'd look in the mirror and say the fee is, and they try and finally it'd be $35,000. And they're looking in the mirror at themselves. Mm-hmm. So we have to get used to confidently stating fees that are commensurate with the value we provide and focusing on the ROI, not the cost. You see, the mistake is we look at cost and we say we're not worth that instead of the ROI, which we are worth.
Interesting, and that sounds like another program we might need to come back for once that book comes out in the end of the year. The self-esteem thing always fascinates me. Just when people are talking about it, you see it a lot of time. People that have very successful businesses, they're up on stage, they're doing wonderful, and then try to get them one-on-one talking, and they're just not nearly as comfortable. They're handshaking or they're hemming and hawing. excellent analogy using the Emmy, since they were just on this past weekend, because it is imposter syndrome. They're imitating other people. So I would say that our group, I don't think many of us would think we're trying to imitate other people, but it does come up. So definitely something interesting to delve deeper into and explore.
Let me tell you something. A couple of years ago, there was an analysis done of advertising agencies and what the perception of the agency by their own clients. And so consulting, PR, we're not talking largely disparate operations here. And what turned out of rather surprising nature was that the clients of the ad agencies had a higher impression of the ad agencies than the ad agencies did of themselves. And consequently, think about this, that affected their pricing. They priced lower than they should have. It affected their delivery. They over-delivered when they didn't have to. And so it's very important to understand how you're perceived. It's very important not to lock yourself in a box with this self-perception. So you need to test that constantly. And I tell lawyers all the time who are very frustrated by all this. I got a letter from the chief of the Supreme Court of Western Australia who told me value-based fees was superb. Lawyers should be he's going to talk about it, the lawyers. The fact is that if you can achieve an amicable divorce, if you can achieve a productive estate resolution, if you can produce a happy outcome to an inappropriate termination or something like that, you're worth more than $400 an hour. And these are the problems that we have when we lock ourselves into the wrong metric for how to price. So we have to think of ourselves as peers of the buyer who provide tremendous value and leave the buyer much better off when we walk away. And certainly public relations does that.
So that's a good segue into the next question. How do we quantify that? And this is something we've talked about internally. We've had, sessions on it, et cetera. We can quantify, back in the olden days, okay, there were this many impressions, but with the plethora of tools out there to get the word out now, measurement has become something that we struggle with. In fact, one of our members submitted a great question about measurement, and I will bring that up later on. But so it's one thing to quantify. Well, you appeared on the 3 major networks and 2 local networks. You've appeared on 5 networks. Okay, so that's one way to do it. But then what is the real value of doing that?
Well, that's not
which is what you're getting at. The way I was mentioning is like the way we don't want to do it.
Well, the problem is what you just mentioned are deliverables. Deliverables are worthless in and of themselves. So appearing in a certain magazine, appearing on the Today Show, appearing on a certain radio interview show, that's just a deliverable. And unless business is increased, it's academic. And that's the mistake professional services people make. They're focused on the deliverables, not the result. And so PR people should be good enough to understand that if they get the right combination of promotion in front of the right kind of buyer with the right kind of services, then there should be an uptick in the key metrics for that business. Now, those metrics might be sales, or it might be margin, or it might be expense reduction. I don't know. But that's how you look at this. And you don't judge things on deliverables, because I don't blame someone for pushing back at a PR proposal that says, for this amount of money, we're going to get you on 20 talk shows. So what if you're on 20 talk shows, but nobody increases their purchasing with you?
Mm-hmm. What if there are 20 talk shows that aren't even in your market or not your target audience?
Yes,
that makes
sense. Picture the trouble that Bob Kraft got in with this Asian massage parlor, who owns the Patriots. Picture they just indicted the 2 top guys in Volkswagen for lying to investors about the United States investigating the emissions problem. Think about some of these people who are justly or unjustly accused and investigated and indicted for crimes and ethical violations. To help these people create a better public image is invaluable. I don't know what Kraft was paying his people after that incident, but it had to be in the millions. So I'm not suggesting, Wendy, that people defend Bob Kraft to people. All I'm suggesting is that you can produce a salutary, better outcome for people that's clearly measurable, and that sometimes is absolutely invaluable.
I agree, and I think that's something we've talked about again, both internally, in our group, but also in some of our wider circles, is getting the client to understand, and I think it comes back to a lot of what you've said, being able to clearly articulate our value, and that's on us to figure out, get away from the deliverables, and how do you really say, look, if this improves your reputation in the community, if this, if it increases sales and you can point to it, that's very quantifiable. But what about some of the intrinsic things when they're just trying to get exposure and become known in the community? How do you...
Well, that's my second category. That's the intangible benefit and the emotional impact. But, you always ask this question. I mean, I believe in the 1% solution. If you improve by 1% a day, in 70 days, you're twice as good. And so, people sometimes sit in my sessions and they'll take 40 pages of notes and they'll record it. All you need is one good idea. And here's an idea I want to suggest to your listeners that might be valuable to some of them. And it's this. You have to understand that behind every objective that's stated, you need to ask why. And so to use your example, if I want a better image in the community, why? Is it because I want more people to purchase from me? Is it because I have to overcome a black eye that our business has? Is it because I want to run for mayor someday? Always ask why, and you'll get at the strategic objective. When you ask how, you go down into tactics. But when you ask why, you go up the ladder. So here's a little formula to make sure that you can monetize almost anything, and it looks like this. You want to ask the client what the objectives are for the engagement. What that is. An objective is a business outcome. An objective is never a deliverable. You don't want to appear on 3 radio shows. What you want is increased business, or you want increased profit, or you want a greater brand, right? And then you say, what are the metrics? That's stage 2. So how will we know we're making progress? How would we know it if we tripped over it? And so the metric might be an uptick in sales, or the metric might be unsolicited referrals coming in and so forth. And then the third thing you ask is, what's the value of achieving the objectives? And once you ask what the value of achieving the objectives is, you and the buyer are now in collaboration creating your value. And the buyer says, well, here's what we get from that. So just to give you a quick example, if you take something as obvious as profit, profit seems to be an objective, but it also seems to be the value. However, if you increase profit of a firm, you give them money that they can use to pay down debt. You give them money that they can use to attract new employees. You give them money they can use to retain existing employees. You give them money they can use to reach out into the community and do good work and be philanthropic. You give them money they can use to do further research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So even something as simple as profit has all those ramifications. If the consultant, if the PR expert takes the time to go through this with the buyer, in collaboration with the buyer as a partner, you're going to find an absolutely ironclad proposal. And the people in my community who come to me for coaching over the years have over an 80% hit rate. And we're talking, high 5 and 6-figure and even beyond that proposals.
Well, proposals, that's a good one because, they're often viewed as the bane of our existence. They're a necessary evil to convert prospects, into clients, or to sell clients into extended or expanded services. A lot of clients expect them as part of the process, but they can take an inordinate amount of time to prepare. It means time away from paying clients, other business development activities, or even, downtime with family, getting out and volunteering at, your favorite charity and stuff.
That's a horrible approach to proposals.
Right.
Proposals should be 2.5 pages. It should take you about 20 minutes to put one together because it's basically a template into which you plug the content for any particular client. I have a book called $1 Million Proposals, and I'm not trying to sell the book. All I'm telling you is that it is very simple to create a proposal, and what you just described is agony. I wouldn't want any part of that.
Well, and I think that's why we say they're the bane of our existence. And actually, I've got $1 million consulting proposals on my desk right now as we speak. I know you also offer some sample proposals in one of your books. So in that book, so you've said to send a proposal. In some of your work, you say send a proposal as a confirmation, not an exploration. So can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that and how PR professionals could go about doing that?
Sure. I've been doing this with people for years and years. If you go back to what I said earlier, you work with the client, you sit with the client and talk about the objectives, that is the business outcomes, the metrics, what are the measures of progress, and the value, which is the impact of meeting those objectives. Those 3 steps are what I call conceptual agreement. And if you reach conceptual agreement with a buyer in person and shake hands, that is the fundamental heart of your proposal. So what the client, now there are other things in there like the fees and the terms and conditions and so on. My proposals have 9 steps, 2.5 pages, very easy. But the point is that once you get that stuff, you've got everything you need. And you don't put in a proposal resumes and pictures and credentials about the firm because you've already established trust. You don't need any of that stuff. That's just filler. All you need are 2.5 pages that talk about conceptual agreement so that when the buyer gets this, the buyer is nodding up and down and says, yes, that's exactly what we discussed. This is a confirmation, not an exploration and not a negotiation. And then in the proposal are the fees. And it says for option 1 it's this, option 2 it's that, option 3 it's that. And when you call to follow up, you say which option do you want to go forward with. That's how simple it is.
Okay, and that covers one of the questions that was submitted by one of our members asking your thoughts on providing options for different service levels at different price points.
Always, because options are a choice of yeses. And psychologically, if you give somebody just a single option, a single alternative, they're going to say either yes or no. If you give them 3 options, and 3 is ideal for a lot of psychological reasons I can explain if you want, but if you give them 3 options, you've increased your chances of acceptance by a factor of 50%. Because instead of saying, should I go ahead, they're now saying, how should I go ahead? And that subtlety makes a huge difference in proposals.
So at what point in the process do you introduce cost or fee structures to a prospective client?
In the proposal. You never talk about fees before you have conceptual agreement and the agreement that somebody will review, consider a proposal. You never discuss them in person.
You never discuss them in person. So,
no, because
so even if you've agreed to everything, okay.
What you say is this. Somebody says, well, can you give an idea of your fee? And you say, look, it wouldn't be fair to you. So you always want to put it in the other person's self-interest. It wouldn't be fair for me to quote something off the top of my head because every project is different. So give me the luxury of going home, thinking about this for 24 hours, and in 24 hours, in a day, I'll have a proposal complete with terms and conditions and everything else in front of you. How will that be? And the fact is nobody objects because nobody needs a figure at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's fine.
And then you come back and you do your work because you've already been working on establishing your value-based fees, and you go ahead and put the pricing in there. So is that the first time you're saying they would see the pricing? That's
right. The first time they see the pricing is in the proposal, and it says option 1 is $65,000, option 2 is $90,000, option 3 is $140,000. And that's what it says. And each option explains how it's different from the others to meet the objectives in the proposal.
Okay. Okay. And as I mentioned, Alan actually shares a couple of proposal examples in his book, $1 Million Consulting Proposals, so you may want to grab a copy of that, too, to complement your value-based fees book. I know many of you have picked up. What are some examples, in one of your other books, How to Maximize Fees in Professional Service Firms, you say never negotiate fees, negotiate value. So how would you advise?
No. Never negotiate fees, negotiate terms is what I say.
Terms. Okay. My apologies. So what are some examples of terms that could reasonably be negotiated?
Well, I think everybody should start with the following terms. 50% on commencement and 50% in 45 days. Alternatively, if they want to pay 100% at the commencement, give them a 10% discount. And by the way, some organizations have a rule that if you're offered a discount, you must take it. It's actually, in some organizations, a must. So I offer 10%. I just started with a coaching client a month ago. It's a 3-month engagement. It's $35,000 a month. And I said, it's 10% off if you pay me in advance. And he immediately wired me, the $100,000, $97,000, whatever that was, with the 10% discount. So those are my optimal terms, 50% and 50% in 45 days. Now, if that's no good, the client's not balking, though, at the total amount of the fees, but just at the terms, then lower the terms to 30% up front, and then 30% then and 30% at another time. That's all right, because you're still getting the same amount of money. It's just being delayed a little bit. And don't forget, the more you delay money, the less it's worth. But that's okay, that negotiation. But don't let clients tell you they're going to pay you by the month or they're going to pay you upon completion or things like that. That's suicide.
Well, and you never know what may happen 30, 60, 90 days down the road either. You have a big hurricane and businesses wiped out and, stuff, living in Florida, we see that a lot. Somebody can get fired or what?
But if a business is wiped out, you owe them their money back. I'm talking about...
That's true, but I'm saying, wiped out and they're not going to be able to do anything for a long period of time.
Well, what I'm talking about, though, is that As time goes on, when you do a good job, especially for a client, the client begins to ask for more things, believing they're part of the deal. It's called scope creep. And therefore, the client says, we'd also like you to do this, and you're still waiting for the final third of your payment. You're afraid not to. Some consultants, by the way, who don't have high self-esteem engage in scope seep, which means they keep volunteering to do more things because they don't think they're worth it otherwise. So the reason they get paid close to the front end is that you don't want the client to continue to have this leverage asking you for more and more stuff.
That makes a good point. So talk about that for a minute since you brought it up, scope creep and scope seep. Scope creep is something that frequently comes up in our surveys and discussions in terms of how to combat scope creep.
Well, you have to have the correct proposal that says, we're going to achieve this by these measures and have this impact. If somebody says to you, hey, listen, Wendy, while you're here, or as long as you're dealing with this subject, can you also do this? You have to say, but that doesn't pertain to the objectives we're trying to meet, nor is it part of any of the options I gave you. If you'd like me to do that, I'll be happy to, but I'll have to create an addendum to the proposal and charge an additional fee. Is it important enough to you for me to do that? And what did that take me, 40 seconds? That's what you say. Language is everything. I have an ebook called The Martial Arts of Language. Language is everything, and it's using the other person's momentum to turn around on them. So that's how you fight scope creep. You put your foot down and you say, that's not what we agreed to. It's not in the contract. But if it's important to you, I'll be happy to do it in consideration of an additional fee.
Okay, good. So moving on now, you've figured out your fees and you've put together your proposal, your two-page. You're not negotiating fees, you're just negotiating terms. You've established value and you have trust and rapport with the buyer. The buyer really, says this is great, whatever. Really want to work with you. Get me your proposal. We'll get things started next Wednesday. Can you come in at 3 and we'll get started with the staff? Okay. So you send the proposal and things are going great until they get to basically your fee structure and they balk. Let's talk about rebutting fee objections, because I know in value-based fees and million-dollar consulting proposals, you talk about the 4 fundamental areas of resistance being, I don't trust you, I don't need you, I don't feel the urgency, and of course our favorite, I don't have that kind of money. I don't have the money to pay you. So, we've all heard it said that people have got to know you, to like you, to trust you, to do business with you. Let's just hit on we won't go through all of these because we can read about them in your books, but let's start with the trust issue. What if prospects come to us and they don't know us? If we're fortunate, they've been referred by somebody who does. Especially if a satisfied client sends them, that's the best marketing tool for us.
Okay, hold on. Let me just address some of these before you go further. There's 2 issues here that are important. The first issue is this: that no money and no time. This isn't about resources. It's about priorities. And I hope your listeners right now this might be another 1% for some people. Everybody has money and everybody has time. The question is who gets them. And so if you're talking to a legitimate buyer, somebody who controls money, they can take money from somewhere else and give it to you. That's what buyers do all the time. I mean, nobody gets up and budgets money for some PR professional who they've never met and might stop in to see them or call them on the phone. But if somebody makes a compelling enough case, they might take the money from elsewhere. When people say, I don't have enough time to go see my kid's soccer game, of course they have enough time. They just choose not to. Now, they might choose not to because they're using their time somewhere else to earn money to support the kid's soccer game, which is fine. But we kid ourselves. We all have time. We all have money. So first, you have to treat time and money as priorities, which they are, and not resources. The second major issue here, Wendy, is that trust, which you started with, no trust, that is legitimate, and that has to be taken care of when you build a trusting relationship at the outset before you ever get to a proposal, before you ever talk about issues. The first thing you have to do is build trust. And it's legitimate for a buyer to be skeptical. It's legitimate for a buyer. If you're not referred in there, if you don't have a great body of work, if you haven't written books, if you're not speaking in the public forums, then it's legitimate for a buyer to say, I don't know who the hell you are. In which case, you have to make a compelling argument for why you're somebody, why you're an object of interest who needs to be heard by this buyer. And that's what you have to do first. And that might take part of a meeting, or it might take an entire meeting, meaning you need a second meeting to go into conceptual agreement. But that's the key to this business, trust.
Do you think it is important to always conduct those meetings in person for prospects, or are you good with telephone, Skype, that kind of stuff for distance?
This is a real question that people have to deal with themselves, and here are my criteria. My feeling is, if it is a significant project, I'll get on an airplane, and I'll go. Now, it has to be a buyer and a significant possibility, but I'll get on an airplane on my dime. If it's a car right away, I'll go for sure. That's no issue. If you don't think it's a big project or you're not sure it's a buyer, then use Zoom. It's important to look into people's eyes. I find Zoom far better qualitatively than Skype. Virtually everybody can use it. And so phone is the last resort. So I would rather look people in the eyes to do it, and I'd rather be there in person if I can. And let me take this opportunity to say to your listeners that you have to make sure you're talking to a buyer. If somebody's not what I call an economic buyer, that is, they have the complete authority to make the investment, you're wasting your breath. In my world, in consulting, I tell people all the time, never talk to human resources people. They're never buyers. You know, I say HR stands for hardly relevant. What you have to do is find the executive who has the fiduciary responsibility to make the investment. And I would think it's the same in PR. You have to find the person who's willing to make the investment in the public relations approach that will enhance the business, and not some in-between.
Okay. Let me switch gears a minute and talk about, which actually I guess it still could be considered rebutting fees in a way. Another form of what I'd call fee objection we've all had to deal with, and some might even say it seems to be increasing, is a challenge of ghosting. You know, that sudden disappearance of someone with whom you've been talking, spending time with. They seem to have a great rapport with you or you with them, and they seem very interested in your services, and then all of a sudden they go dark with no communication, no explanation. They don't respond to follow-up attempts. You know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you, is there any type of, hey, this is your, not really, but just for discussion's sake, hey, this is your final notice that I don't hear from you, we're done. What would you do to spur them on? Do you just let them go? Is there any specific steps you would follow to try and find out what's going on?
Well, of course, this is a widespread problem. And the problem is it's a lack of trust. So, what happens is, even after you've submitted a proposal sometimes, the buyer doesn't get back to you on the agreed-upon date at the agreed-upon time. It's because the buyer's asked for a proposal, essentially, to get you out of the office. And that's a way of dismissing you. So if a proposal comes too easily, before you have trust, that's a way to get you out of there. The buyer has no intention of following up. Moreover, most people go into a contingent action. That is, how do I get them to call me? Should I go through the secretary? Should I send them an email? Should I send them a hard copy note? What should I do? When they should be in preventive action. And the preventive action is you establish a tight relationship so that, partners don't fail to meet commitments. And if they see you as a true peer, they won't fail to meet a commitment. You also have to do what I call date, time, and action. And that means, let's talk on Thursday at 10 o'clock to discuss options. Do you want me to call you on your office phone or your cell phone? But too often we say, I'll get back to you next week. Or let's talk once you've reviewed this. It always has to be specific. Date, time, and action, get on the calendar. So people do go dark, which is what you're talking about. But it's usually because we don't have the proper trusting relationship with them, and therefore they don't feel the obligation to get back to us.
So you wouldn't necessarily say it seems to be more prevalent after prices are disclosed.
It's got nothing to do with prices. Zero.
Nothing to do with prices. It
Zero.
goes back to trust, which we said was the foundation of all of it. They've got to.
That's right. Everybody has money. And if people really look at the return on investment, what you and I do is not vulnerable to price. But if they don't look at return on investment because we haven't brought it up, we haven't brought about value, all they'll do is look at budget and cost. And that's not where you want to be.
So is there a specific type of final contact you would recommend? Or just, do you have a rule of thumb if you've responded or reached out 2 or 3 times and they've gone dark, just move on?
Well, yeah. What I recommend is 3 letters and a phone call. Let me reverse that. 3 phone calls and a letter. And so let's suppose you were supposed to speak on Monday, right? You haven't heard from them by Friday. I would call on Friday. I would call on Tuesday. I'd call on the second Friday. And that's because some people do not get their voicemail all the time. Some people do forget, but not 3 calls. So I would make 3 calls. And if you get no reaction, then I would write a hard copy letter, 3 calls and a letter. And the letter doesn't burn bridges. The letter says, I've tried to reach you. I don't want to haunt you. I've done my best. I think we could really be of help for you. But the ball is in your court. I'm here to help if I'm needed. Feel free to contact me, and then move on.
That's a great formula. Thank you. So, all right, now let's talk about converting existing clients. And I know in value-based fees, you've got a great test to determine the potential to shift a client to value-based fees. And this is our existing clients who have been on retainer, who have been on hourly. Maybe some of them have been with us for several years. Are there any precautions you would warn about before trying to transition clients, and then what specific steps should you take to transition those clients?
Well, let me say two things. The first is there's nothing wrong with retainers. Retainers are a mode of payment for advisory work in my world. And so more and more people in my world are moving to advisory work because it's low labor. And wealth is really discretionary time. So as people move toward advisory work, they're charging retainers, like I did with this person for 3 months. So that's fine. But if you've got a client who's been paying you on a time basis for an hour a day, a week, a month, what you have to do is pick the ones that are going to be longest term potential for you, the ones that represent the greatest long-term income for you. And what you want to say is this. You don't want to take bread off the table. So what you want to say is, I have been practicing a new relationship with new clients, which they find hugely beneficial. You've been such a great client, I'd be remiss if I did not offer it to you. If you want to continue to work in our current way, that's fine. But let me explain to you the benefits of this new relationship. And so with this new relationship, which is value-based, you want to make sure that they see the additional value in so doing. For example, there's no meter continually running. Every time you pick up the phone. If I ask my lawyer about a bill he sent me, he's charging me for my question about his last bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to show.
So it impedes communication.
Yeah. You want to show there's no meter running. You want to show they have access to you without worrying about budgets. You want to show that subordinates can contact you, without worrying about getting permission or whatever it happens to be. But you want to, with these key clients, show them the value. If they want to continue the way they are, you don't take bread off the table, but there's a good chance you can convert them if you can convince them it's a better way.
So then talk about raising retainers with existing clients. If you've got the good value-based retainer, what's your advice for raising retainers?
If you want to raise fees, whether they're project fees or retainer fees, you have to introduce new value. You cannot increase a fee to an existing client without introducing new value. I mean, how can you do that? So consequently, you have to say to them, I would like to change the nature of our relationship to include the following because I think you need it. And that's what you include. So it could be that I'll make this up, okay, Wendy, but it could be that you're on the East Coast, they're on the West Coast. You're going to accommodate West Coast hours. It could be that you're going to accommodate 2 or 3 more people in our organization having access to you. It could be that you're going to come in and facilitate some meetings about the nature of the PR work and how it can be exploited. I mean, I don't know. But that's the kind of thing you need to do to increase an existing retainer. Show more value.
Okay. Well, boy, you have given us at least 2 or 3 scripts I've already heard. You've given us proposal outlines, and we still have time left for Q&A. This has been fantastic, Alan. I want to circle back to a couple things. Some people have been, keying in as we've been talking. One is, what is your favorite way to demonstrate ROI? And this goes back to when we were talking about media impressions, things like that, without the benefit of a budget for research to get benchmarks.
Without the benefit of a budget, what was that last part after that? To
get benchmarks. So in other words, how do you demonstrate ROI if you don't have, like this, we were talking about using media impressions as one way to demonstrate, hey, we got you on TV.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
I think you remember that when the internet, was newer, everybody talked about clicks and pass-throughs and all this kind of nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And it
was like
nonsense.
So long ago now.
Well, only conversion matters, only business matters. So I think what you have to do is you have to say to the client, look, what would constitute evidence to you that we're making progress toward these objectives? And the client might say something like, we're getting 10 more unsolicited referrals per week. And I would say, well, that doesn't mean you've got money. It just means you've got referrals. But the client says, no, if these are the right referrals, we know we can close 20% of them. And then I would say, well, what's that worth to you? And that's where I'm getting my value, and that's where I'm getting my assurance that the client is fine with that. But I think you always have to look at the business outcomes, and I would really try to frustrate everyone from trying to do extensive research into this stuff because it's very costly and it takes a lot of time. if you can anecdotally reach agreement with your buyer, and that's why this is a partnership, that the buyer's going to be happy if the following things happen, then you're in business.
Makes sense. Very logical. Next question, Carla asked, creatives, including PR consultants, always have an issue with their work being sought at the lowest price. With sites like Upwork, there's a perception that PR practitioners are a dime a dozen and can be had for pennies on the dollar. How would you suggest we overcome perceptions created by these work sites that have folks offering rock bottom prices and who don't always bring value to the table?
This happens to consultants all the time, and I have an absolutely ironclad answer, and that is I say to the prospect the following: do you actually look for the cheapest heart surgeon?
That would be a big no, having just had a father go through open heart surgery.
And so nobody looks for the cheapest attorney if they have a really important case. Nobody looks for the cheapest doctor if they're ill. And nobody wants the cheapest PR person or consultant or expert when they need help in that area. This is not like buying a toaster where all toasters are alike and you want to see who can reduce the cheapest one, or getting a screwdriver or a bird feeder. It's about the long-term impact on one's business, on one's enterprise. And your listeners have to understand that they are the ones who can set themselves apart. They are the ones who, because they can blog, they can put out newsletters, they can speak publicly, they can do all these things that these abstract, nameless people on the web can't do. That's what's important. I mean, all of us get these stupid daily pieces of spam from people who want to improve SEO and all this kind of nonsense, which is worthless. Who on earth would buy from a spammer? Only stupid people. And so I don't want stupid people as clients. But people who really understand their businesses and appreciate their businesses are not going to buy from somebody who's advertising the lowest prices, from some island in the Pacific. So I think it's up to us to really put a case forward for why it's so important to have an actual expert dealing with their key issues.
Okay, so another question we've had come in, are there tips on vetting what is actually a legitimate economic buyer? Sometimes it can be hard to discern when you're first meeting with a potential client.
That's true, and you have to be brave. You have to ask this question. Whose budget is this coming out of? Is it your budget or is it someone else's? That's exactly what you have to ask. It's not threatening, and you can't worry about losing business. And the person's going to say, well, it's not my budget. And you say, fine, let me tell you how I work. Ethically, and then you pause, that's the comma, right? Ethically, I have to meet the person who's making the investment and hear from their lips what their expectations are. Otherwise, I'm not sure we're right for each other. And then you say, I would be shocked if you would consider any PR professional who did not want to hear that from the buyer's lips. Some people will say, no, don't worry about it. I can do this. And then you say, okay, so there's nobody else who has to rubber stamp this. I say, well, yes, but it'll be approved. No, that's the economic buyer. Committees, by the way, are never buyers. There might be a committee evaluating something that's strictly feasibility. There's always somebody on the committee or to whom the committee reports who's the buyer. Some people will tell you, I'm not the buyer, but I'm tasked. I love this. It's a new age verb, right? I've been tasked.
I've been tasked, yes.
Yeah, I've been tasked to vet people. And you say, well, I appreciate what you've been tasked to do, but here's how I work. I don't provide proposals. I don't provide insights except to the person who's going to be making the investment. Otherwise, what I say gets misinterpreted, and you're going to be asked questions that you can't answer in my place. That's
good. Okay, let me go through. We've got a bunch of questions in here. I want to try to rapid fire real quick so we can get everybody out on time. I know most of this group would love to sit here with you for another several hours. So Annette says it's just extremely difficult for PR people to show that increase in business, especially when the client is also hiring agencies or consultants to handle their social media ads, et cetera, and there's no silver bullet, especially boutique agencies or solo practitioners. We don't have the tools to measure sales and growth. And I think we've talked about that a little bit. So if you don't have the tools to measure sales and growth, how do you...
Well, that's not the issue. The client has the tools to measure sales and growth. And that's why it's a partnership with the client. So the client will have those processes. You have to tap into them. You have to say, how would you know, what do you have here right now that tells you it's not good enough? See, that's the reverse. And if you know it's not good enough now, then you have the tools to tell whether it is good enough or better than good enough. I would also suggest that, your professionals in your association have to come out with insights and have to be bold about what they say about promoting businesses so that you pique people's interest and they want to listen more. But clients already have their own measurement devices. Don't make it more difficult than it is.
Great, thank you. Kevin, and this goes back to when we were talking about payment up front, 50%. He says, remember that if your contract goes through a client's procurement department, they often default to net 45 days payment. Do you have any suggestions for getting around that?
Sure, I do. It happens all the time, but procurement departments are low level. They're in the bowels of the organization, and buyers can supersede them. And what you have to say is, this is how I work. And in the rare cases where the buyer says, God, my hands are tied, now it's a low-level buyer, you say, fine, here's what we'll do. I will bill this now, and in 45 days when I'm paid, we'll start. But that's a contingent action. That's a worst-case action. Usually what you say to the buyer is, my terms and conditions are this money gets paid on commencement. Now, commencement to me is within 7 days. I can understand you can't hand me a check at the moment, but it's within 7 days. So how can you circumvent or supersede this arbitrary rule? It's not a government legal qualification. It simply is a silly internal rule. So how do you want to get by that? There's a company on the West Coast. I don't know if it's I think it's Genentech or maybe it's Oracle, but they don't pay vendors, people they consider vendors, which is everybody, for 120 days. I wouldn't do business with them. You know,
I wouldn't either.
That's simply this giant company taking advantage of its providers is horrible. So the same thing here. 45 days is just a way to get a float on their money, and I'd tell them that doesn't do it.
Okay. Angelica wants to know if you would suggest including a fee when meeting with client if you've already spent an hour on the call going over their needs. For example, charge them $350 and say it'll be applied to our initial month working together.
No. First of all, I would not spend an hour on the phone. It's not needed. You don't need that much time to find out what their needs are. The second thing is $350 is what people are paying for a good bottle of wine these days, and so I would not charge anything that low. The third thing is it's fine to give a rebate against a project, but I wouldn't do it for just essentially establishing the relationship and gaining credibility and gaining trust. So you have to think about that. Here's an interesting psychological dynamic, by the way. The more you charge, the more you're respected. We think that fee follows value, and it only does to a certain point, and after that, value follows fee. People believe they get what they pay for. And so you don't need to drive a Bentley to get somewhere. You don't need to wear a Brioni suit or have a Bulgari watch. But people do because the ego needs are so important. And the same thing with all of our business. I've seen firms nearly out of business that actually raised their fees and suddenly, had a windfall. So don't be afraid of charging high fees and never charge in the hundreds for anything.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you. Denise asks about increasing a retainer. She says she knows she cannot grow what the client will have her do, but she's hitting the ball out of the park in terms of what they hired her to do. How can she increase their fees? Increase the size of the park and offer to do things that, you're not constrained by anything. There's this fallacy, build it and they will come. The reality is build it and tell them you've built it, and then they will come. And so I suggest she get her client to a bigger ballpark. Great advice. Deborah's asking if you distinguish between corporations and nonprofits. I assume she means when developing your fees and the stuff we've been talking about. But Deborah, if you want to clarify if I'm incorrect, please jump on there and do so. There's no difference. There's no difference. I was just appointed president of the Board of Trustees of the ballet up here. I've been chair of the Newport International Film Festival. I've been on the board of regional theaters. I was on a board at Harvard. And the fact is that there's always money. For nonprofits, they get money not just from donations, they get money from heavy hitters. In other words, a board member or a big donor can subsidize anything. They'll subsidize a search firm if it's needed. They'll subsidize a PR effort if it's needed. In fact, executive directors of nonprofits take a course in school called professional whining. And what they do is they whine that they have no money and they whine that they have no resources and all that kind of stuff, but it's not true. So I would treat them as organizations, period. That's great. Okay, we've just got a couple minutes left, and then we have announcements at the end. I won't make you stay through those by any means, but so we've saved our best questions for last. So got some good ones for you here. Your career has taken you to 60 countries and 49 states. Why are you afraid to go to North Dakota?
Did you ever see the movie Fargo?
Yes, years ago.
That's the reason.
Okay, that's good. So we know you have 2 dogs, Coco and Bentley. Bentley is a white German Shepherd.
Correct.
What is Coco?
Coco is a Cavapoo, which is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel and Poodle. And that takes so long to say that, we just call it Puppy, but that's what she is.
That's great. Last but not least, you have been married over 51 years.
Right.
What's your secret to relationship success? And we say relationship because we talk about building trust, building relationships with our prospects and our clients. What's your secret to relationship success?
Well, in my case, you have to marry a great woman. She's my high school sweetheart. But you have to understand that life is full of compromise and it's full of conflict that you have to turn into something positive. So, when we typically fight, our arguments are about 8 minutes. They're pretty good arguments, and then we have 8 minutes of silence, and then we're fine. Absolutely fine. We never go to bed angry with each other, so we never wake up angry with each other. And most of our fights are about stupid little things like, why did you hide the remote for the TV? But you have to ask yourself this question in any kind of relationship. Did the other person do what he or she did to hurt me, or did they do it and it inadvertently hurt me, or irritated me, or annoyed me? And if their motive is pure, they happen to leave the remote control on the sink in the bathroom because that's where they were watching TV, then that wasn't done to hurt me, And that resolves a lot of pain, really.
That's great. And I've got one more that came in via chat that I didn't want to overlook. Great discussion today. We've got several of those comments. Public relations has become a female-dominated profession. There's societal statistical data showing the effects of gender bias, and often we must articulate value to the C-suite where women decision-makers remain a minority. How do we adjust for these biases, which can make it more difficult for women to achieve value parity?
You're not going to like this answer, but I've been doing this for 30 years. About 55% of my global community skews female. That's just the way it is. And just this morning, I had an inquiry from Australia. A woman who's an indigenous Australian told me that being an indigenous Australian and a woman provides all these kinds of difficulties and so forth. How can she possibly get ahead in consulting? And I told her just to stop it. The fact is that there are some biased and bigoted people in the world, but they're a very tiny minority of the population. They get a lot of press. But the fact is that people want value. They want to improve their lives. They want to improve their families. They want to improve their organizations. They want to improve the contributions they can make to society. And they will accept value no matter where it comes from. So don't worry about age. Don't worry about gender. Don't worry about race or ethnicity or anything else, whether you're able or disabled. Don't let that get in your way. The fact is, if you can provide value, people will hire you. Stop making excuses.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Final closing thought, Alan, if you could tell us one thing to charge forth with in addition to the several dozen you've already given us in the last 45, 50 minutes, what would that be?
Have the courage of your talent. You're all good at what you do, and you're all good at a lot of other things besides. I mean, some of you can probably play a diminishing fifth chord in a guitar, for God's sake. Have the courage of your talent so that you don't feel inferior. You understand that you're a peer of the buyer, and that you understand that you can help people tremendously. If you get up in the morning thinking you have to sell, you're going to feel guilty about interrupting people. If you get up in the morning feeling that you have value to offer, you'll intercede with any person you can because you want to help them. It's that simple.
Great. Well, with that, thank you, Alan, so very much. I know you are very selective in your speaking, and we are so appreciative that you were willing to share some of your sage wisdom and insight with us today. Hopefully it has helped our members rethink some of their pricing strategies. And we just thank you, appreciate you being here, love the work you're doing, and we are going to go into a few housekeeping announcements. So with that, I will release you with our gratitude for your sharing with us today, Alan. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And if your folks want to go to alanweiss.com, there are hundreds of free articles, free audio, free video. They're welcome to them.
And we've got your web address on the screen now for those that are on Zoom. And I would say sign up for Alan's newsletters. They are short, to the point, easy reads, have some funny musings in some of those, very, very effective. So lots and lots of great resources there. Alan, again, thank you very much. We really appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks, Wendy. Take care of yourself.
All right. All right, everybody. Well, hopefully you have pages and pages of notes, and we'll jump on his website, look at some of the resources Alan has available, and then let's mark your calendars for next month is our third annual virtual conference. We will do our standard 3 sessions. Our first one will be with Michael Lasky and Darren Fried from Davis & Gilbert. They'll be talking about the major problems PR firms face when entering into contracts. We'll talk about key aspects and protections you should include in your updated model contracts, everything from compensation models, termination provision, et cetera, and tips on how agencies should negotiate the terms of the client contract when the client's form of a contract is being used. We'll also have our annual State of the Indie Profession. That is the debut of the survey results, and our own J.W. Arnold will be sharing that again for us. As you know, J.W. is past IPA chair, APR, PRSA fellow. He's president of PRDC Online, and this is a survey. You have seen some stuff. You've probably gotten an email. You've seen some stuff in the forums. If you haven't completed the survey, get that done as soon as you can. I think that's about to close, and we want to get your information. Our third session will be with Donna Francavilla. She is an award-winning news journalist and founder of Frankly Speaking. She's going to talk about weaving your narrative and then share her insider secrets for working with the media. Since she has been a TV reporter, she's been an anchor on a New York news station. She currently covers the state's biggest news stories for CBS Radio, so it promises to be another great afternoon. We'll be getting more information out to you about virtual conference shortly. Also, mark your calendars. Remember, we change our normal program day and time for November and December due to the holidays. And so November will be November 6th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. That's standard time. December 3rd will be the annual, so you want to go independent. That is the national webinar open up to everyone who might be interested in setting out their shingle in the new year. That's why we do that in December. Great opportunity to come get some ideas and refresh memories and stuff for those of us that already have our shingles out. So join us for that. That will be on a Tuesday, and we do that because it's a national webinar and getting on their platform each year, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. Paula, is your line open? I want to introduce Paula McDonald. You all know her as our Fearless Section Chair, who has been just doing a phenomenal job leading our group this year as chair. Paula, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you to Wendy and Amber for putting together today's session. It was incredible, to say the least. A lot out there to bite off and bring into our businesses. And I just wanted to remind everyone who might be attending PRSA Icon in San Diego in a few weeks that we are organizing a meetup for the IPA section out there. And I put in the chat a link to the form to get on the contact list for that, so you can get updates for that. And that would be it for me today. Thanks so much to everyone for attending.
Thanks, Paula. And I don't think I mentioned the virtual conference is October 16th, so that's also a shift from the normal time of the month we meet. So that's October 16th, 1 to 4:30 p.m. Check the online forums. We are trying to keep that as updated as possible with dates, times of upcoming programs, all that good stuff, so you'll find more information there. And that concludes our program. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will look forward to, quote-unquote, seeing you October 16th for a virtual conference. So you guys have a great rest of the week, and we will talk with you soon. Bye-bye.